Hello again and welcome back to the channel. This is Michael from TOEFLresources.com. Today, I am happy to finally present my updated guide to TOEFL Speaking Question 3. In today's video, I'm going to start by giving you a sample question. After that, I'll explain how to answer the question and how to get a high score when you do. After that, I'll give you a template for your answer that you can use on test day. And at the end of the video, I'll explain the most common topics that appear in this part of the test, so there's no surprises when you take the TOEFL. First up, though, the basics of TOEFL Speaking Question 3. At the beginning, you'll have 45 seconds to read a short article about an academic idea or concept. It's going to be about 100 words in just one short paragraph. After 45 seconds, the article will disappear and you'll never see it again for the rest of your life. After that, you'll have 1 or 2 minutes to listen to a lecture on the same topic. The lecture is going to give 1 or 2 examples that illustrate the concept. You only get to listen to it one time, so make sure you take good notes. Following that, you'll have 60 seconds to answer a question. More specifically, you'll have 30 seconds to prepare your answer and then 60 seconds to speak. Question's going to look something like this. Explain the concept of whatever using the examples given in the lecture. Now, the exact wording of the question changes from week to week. Don't worry about that. No matter how it's phrased, you're going to answer the question in the exact same way. So what does the reading look like? Well, I've got an example on the screen here. Now, I'm not going to read it out loud, but you can pause the video and check it out if you want. But there's a few things you should keep in mind. The reading always has a title, and I want you to really notice that title and probably put it into your notes. The title is probably the most important thing, right? Because this is the concept or idea that's being discussed in both the reading and the lecture. So make sure you know what that is and you can remember it. After that, I want you to keep an eye out for a very broad definition of the term. That's usually at the beginning of the article. It's not a guarantee, but that's where it is most of the time. So in this case, it's about social impact framing. That's the title. And here in the first sentence, you get a basic definition of social impact framing. Now, there's a ton of stuff, right, in the rest of the reading, which I consider somewhat less important. But the other thing I want you to keep an eye out for is a sort of like, so what sentence. Why is this important? What is the result of this? Like, why does this even exist? And in this case, it explains, well, the whole point of social impact framing is to build trust, enhance brand loyalty, and attract customers that care deeply about social issues. Right? So these are the 3 things I really want you to keep an eye out for on test day. And more importantly, I want you to keep an eye out for these 3 things as you practice for this question. Before you take the test, I really expect you to do 10, 20, 30, 40 practice questions. And these are the 3 things you're going to be looking for every single time you practice. Okay, so after the reading goes away, you listen to a lecture. I've got the transcript here, but of course on test day, there's no transcript. You just listen. Now, the first thing students say when they see this lecture, they're like, oh my God, this is really long. And, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty damn long. It's like 1, maybe 2 minutes. That's a lot of speaking. That's a lot of listening. It can be overwhelming at first, but as you practice, as you prepare, it will become easier. There's a few things I've highlighted here that I want you to keep in mind as you practice. At the beginning of the lecture, you're going to get like another definition of the thing that's under discussion. In this case, he says, okay, let's talk about social impact framing. And then in a very short half sentence, he says what it is. And then he says, I want to mention a couple of examples. That's probably the least important part of the lecture, right? Because you've already got that information. So at the beginning, you can just stay calm and not kind of worry if at the very beginning you're like, what's going on? I got all these notes right away. Well, maybe not. But you really need to start paying attention when the lecturer brings in the examples. And I think the most important part of the example is at the very beginning, where he states, like, literally and tangibly, what is the example. So in this case, he says, first up, there's a global fashion company with a new line of clothes that wants to attract customers that care about the environment. And they're going to use social impact framing. So that's the most important thing, that's setting up of what the example is. Now, after that, there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff. And this is what gives most students headaches, right? They're like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff. How much of it should I include? How much of it is important? And the answer is that basically it's all important. Now, your goal here is to get as much of this as possible in your notes and as much of this as possible in your answer. You're not going to get every single detail. That's impossible, right? You're not going to be a perfect kind of superhuman TOEFL machine. Nobody is. So don't worry if you miss some of it, but keep in mind that your goal is to get as much of it as possible. As you practice, just try to get a bit more every time. Okay, and then he begins the second example, and your goal, most of all, is to get like what the example is. In this case, it's a tech company launching a new cell phone app that teaches kids to read. That's it. That's the most important part of the second example. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff, and your goal is to get as much of it as you can. Now, I will mention, of course, the other variation of this is when there's just one long example. Kind of goes the same, right? The most important part is at the beginning when he sets up the example, and then he's just going to talk, for the next 90 seconds about that example. Your goal is to get as much of it as possible. Usually when there's one example, it comes from the lecturer's personal life or his background. Maybe he talks about an experiment that he did, as a professor, or just something that he experienced, as a kid or when he was in school. That's what the one example variation is usually about. Okay, so after the lecture is finished, you get the question. In this case, it's going to be explain the concept of social impact framing using the examples given in the lecture, right? 30 seconds to prepare, 60 seconds to speak. There's going to be a loud, obnoxious beep when it's time to speak, and then another equally obnoxious beep when the 60 seconds is finished. And there'll be sort of like a progress bar or a clock on the screen that tells you how much time you have left. Before I give you my sample answer, I'm just going to show you my notes. I don't know. A lot of students, they really want me to teach them some special note-taking technique, and maybe such a thing exists. I don't know. My approach to note-taking is pretty basic. I just kind of split my page in half. One half for the reading notes, one half for the lecture notes. I write in big, bold letters what the concept is, and then I just get like the definition and the so what point at the end. And I'm just using like short forms, calm approach instead of communication approach. I'm using arrows to make connections instead of complete sentences. I'm using a plus sign instead of and, another plus sign, another plus sign. I write sock-ish instead of social issue. Just short forms, arrows, pluses. If I had some negative, like it's bad or this doesn't exist, I'd put an X. And then over here, I have the first example, I have the second example. Fash comp, new clothes. So I have to kind of fill in the blanks in my head when I'm speaking to say, oh, it's a global fashion company that is trying to sell some new clothes to customers, blah, blah. And that's about it, right? There's nothing too much to my notes. Keep in mind that you're never, ever going to be able to write complete sentences, and you're never, ever going to be able to include, all the little details in your notes. So part of your answer is going to come from your head. I do want you to keep that in mind. But again, if you have any questions about note-taking that I might be able to answer, leave a comment down below. All right, so here's my sample answer. Now, I'm not going to read this out loud because, again, I don't want to bore you, and that's not what we're here for. But I did read it out loud a few times at my normal speaking pace, and I was able to finish this all in about 55, 56 seconds. So, it is possible. And this includes almost all the details from the lecture and then the important stuff from the reading that we talked about. Now, of course, whenever I put my answers in here, people often say, well, I can't include that much. I can't say all of that in 60 seconds. Well, okay. Now, keep in mind, in a couple of minutes, I'm going to break this down and tell you exactly what I did and why I put certain things in certain places and how I organized it. But first of all, if you're worried that you can't fit all of this in, I want you to delete that last sentence. That'll make it a bit easier to finish in 60 seconds. And if you're saying, I still can't finish this all in 60 seconds, well, take out the last detail here from the first example. Just take that out. You don't need to say it. It's not critical. And you're saying, I still can't finish. I still can't do this in 60 seconds. No way. Okay, take out the last detail about the second example. It's not critical. You can delete it. And you're saying, well, I still can't finish. Okay, fine. Remove the last part of the reading summary, right? And there you go. That's a shorter answer. I will read this one out loud. Here goes. Social impact framing is when companies emphasize their positive social contributions. The professor gives a couple of examples. First, he mentions how a fashion company with a new line of clothes might try to highlight how environmentally friendly they are. For instance, they can make advertisements that emphasize how they use recycled materials in the manufacturing process and keep repeating certain keywords. Secondly, he says that a tech business with a new reading app for kids might show how the app helps low-income families. When they create promotional materials, they might include stories of kids who have improved their lives by using the app. Now, that's a solid answer, right? That could still get a pretty high score. It's a bit short when I say it, but you know what? Maybe when you say it, it'll be closer to a minute. It's still a great answer. It doesn't have every single detail, but I think it could still score like 25, 26 points, I think. So keep that in mind. You don't have to be absolutely perfect. You don't have to include every single detail. Just get as many as you can, as many as a person with your ability level can, and just keep pushing that ability level higher and higher as you continue to practice. All right, now let's break down the structure of my answer, how I approach this question. I do a few things. First up, I start with the reading summary, just that main definition. I'm just saying what social impact framing is. And I'm going to start that answer just by stating what the term is, right off the bat. Social impact framing is, and then I'm given the definition. And then I'm going to have a little transition. I'm going to say something like, the professor gives a couple of examples. And keep in mind that could be the professor gives an example if it's just one. Then I'm going to say first he mentions, and I'm going to just start shoving in all the details I know, all the details I remember from the first example. And then something like secondly he says, and then I'm just shoving in all the details I remember from the second example. And at the end, I'm going to tie it all together by getting that so what sentence, from the reading. Something like both cases show how firms can attract customers who care deeply about social issues. So in this case, I'm linking both of these examples to the reading, to the concept. I tie it all together there at the end. That's my approach. That's how I organize it every time, and I usually score pretty well on the TOEFL. A few more specific things that I do to kind of make my answer strong. Well, I like to use transitional phrases, and you guys know these, right? Things like first, for instance, moreover, secondly, not only that. These little transitional phrases, sometimes referred to as transitional adverbs, I believe. You want to kind of scatter those throughout your answer. That gives it a better flow. It makes it easier for the rater to understand what you're talking about. And it's something that the AI refers to as discourse coherence. It just makes your whole answer more coherent and understandable. So just kind of scatter these throughout. I think I've got 5 of them here. That's a good number. You could even do 6 or 7 if you wanted. What else am I doing? Well, I'm putting in a few conjunctions. I used to really kind of go overboard with the conjunctions. If you watch my old videos, I kind of go crazy about that. But, you could put in a few. Not as many as I used to teach, but just things like and, but, when, while, although, right? These sort of conjunctions, again, give your answer a bit more grammatical sophistication. And it also gives it better organization. And again, it makes it easier for the reader to kind of understand where you're going and what you're talking about and what ideas you're connecting. So try to toss a few of those into your answer. Both coordinating conjunctions and subordinating conjunctions, if you know what that means. 3 or 4 in your answer would be a good number. I'm also trying my very best to vary my vocabulary. This is something that I've really been emphasizing more in my lessons over the past year. We've learned a lot more about the AI that's used to grade this test. And we now know that the AI is pretty crazy about vocabulary range and depth. It doesn't like when you repeat words. So kind of what have I done here? Well, I said companies at the beginning. And then I said company again. And I'm like, oh no, what am I doing? I changed it to business down below. And honestly, tech company sounds really great. That's totally like normal and natural. It's actually better than tech business. But anyways, I'm still saying tech business because I just don't want to repeat company again. And then down in the final sentence, you can see how I used firms instead of company or business because I want to keep varying that. And here, check it out. Here I said they emphasize their positive social contributions. And here I'm like, what can I say? How about highlight? They highlight how environmentally friendly they are because I didn't want to repeat the word emphasize. And it's tricky, right? Like the first time I made this sample answer, I just went emphasize, emphasize, emphasize. And I'm like, done. And then when I was putting together the lesson for you guys, I'm like, oh yeah, I need to show off my vocabulary. So I changed it. And here, I just changed it to show. I didn't want to say the same word again, so I changed it to show. Likewise, advertisements. Okay, and then I changed it to ads. Not a great change, but maybe better than nothing. And then I kind of went real like ridiculous, and I said promotional materials. And that's, that sounds great. It's not the easiest thing to do like live. It takes some effort and practice. You see what I mean? I keep talking about when you practice, as you practice, keep this in mind. So what I'm saying is, kids, you got to practice. Speaking of kids, I said kids, and then I said kids again, and then I said youngsters. I'm trying. I'm trying my best to vary this. It's hard. And I even failed, right? Like I said, attract customers. And then at the end, I also said attract customers again. I probably should have changed that, but, I couldn't come up with anything. So what I'm trying to say here overall is keep varying that vocabulary. Try your best. Show off what you know. In terms of a template, just a very basic template for this task. Start by saying what the concept is. Impact framing is whatever. And then you explain it in about 13 seconds. The professor gives a couple of examples. I don't know, take 2 or 3 seconds to say that, keeping in mind that maybe it's one example. And then first he mentions 22 seconds to summarize the first one. Secondly, he says 22 seconds to summarize the second one. If there's only one example, just go with first he mentions. And then just carry it through to the end. And even though there's only one example, it's totally fine to say the word first. The one thing I didn't put in the template is that sentence at the end that ties it all together. And that's a deliberate omission. I've left that out of the template because, as I said, a lot of people struggle to finish. And that's the first sentence that kind of gets deleted if you're not able to finish in 60 seconds. So I left it out of the template so that when you practice, it's not there and you're only kind of adding it in if you find yourself kind of like that you're kind of at an advanced level or you're able to speak very quickly. So keep that in mind. And I don't have a specific phrase for that. You could just say anything really. All right, getting close to the end, but I hope you can stick around for the last couple screens here. The question, of course, I get most commonly is how is this graded? Like how does it get scored? Like, who's doing this? What do they base it on? Well, keep in mind there is a human rater plus an AI rater, and they are looking at fairly similar things. But the most important thing, I guess, is whether you have correct and complete details, right? So you got to get as much as you can from the reading and the listening. And of course, they have to be correct and accurate. You can't just make stuff up. So that's how you're graded. That's mostly done by the human, not by the AI. You're also judged based on your fluency. That is your speed, how quickly or slowly you speak, how many pauses you have, like in the right places and the wrong places, and how many stumbles and self-corrections, which is when you kind of stop and correct what you've said or just kind of, dance around trying to find the right word. That's what I call a stumble. That's mostly judged by the AI, but I think the human has something to do with it as well. You're also judged based on your pronunciation. Just basically what the AI refers to as vowels and rhythm. Are you pronouncing those vowels kind of properly in the way a native speaker might? And do you have a good rhythm, sort of an intonation? Is that accurate and easy to understand? That's judged by both the human and the AI. And finally, grammar and vocabulary, right? You want to have correct grammar, no mistakes, and you want to have vocabulary that has depth and range. You want to avoid repeating words too many times. That's judged, I guess that's just both by the AI and by the human. Lastly, the most common topics that appear in this section of the test. I did a survey not too long ago, I think of about 400 people who took the test, and I'm like, well, what topic did you get? And here's what they told me. The most common topic is animals, like features of an animal or characteristics of an animal. Like they'll say, oh, how do like mountain goats survive in like cold climates? And they'll just talk about two different like features or characteristics. Something like that. Business and marketing, like we just saw, is a very, very common topic. In fact, it's the second most common topic. Psychology and learning, right? A common thing could be something like 2 ways that young babies learn something new. And I'll give you a couple examples of babies learning something. And then last but not least, I kind of lump them all together, but it's like art, history, and literature. 2 features that are used in paintings or something like that. These are the most common topics. Not a guarantee. You could get something outside of this, but this is what you can expect to see. And if you do get something that I haven't mentioned, leave a comment down below and maybe I'll add it to the list when I update the video next year. A few final tips I want you to keep in mind. Some general advice. First of all, you do need to summarize the reading. There are teachers who say, nah, just totally ignore the reading. Don't do anything with it. Just focus on the listening. Well, that's not good advice. Listen, the reading is there for a reason. You can't just ignore it. You have to use it. Now, I will say the reading details are probably less important. That's why I only have you speaking for like 12 seconds about the reading, right? Like it is less important. The lecture is more important, but keep that in mind. I want you to paraphrase. Don't just copy the reading and the lecture word for word, but don't get obsessed with it. Just gently, lightly paraphrase it. Another tip is that good note-taking requires practice. Notes are important. You need good notes to answer this, but it's not easy to do right off the bat. So I want you to practice it as much as you can. Another tip, use official practice resources if you can. I'm talking about things like the 3 books that ETS has published, maybe stuff from the ETS website, the new TOEFL Test Ready product, stuff like that that's published by ETS. There are a lot of bad practice speaking questions out there. Even some really respected websites and books have really crappy questions. So if you can, use official stuff. Finally, the advice I generally give my students is to do shadowing exercises every day. Now, if you don't know what shadowing is, just look it up on YouTube or Google. You'll find some explanations. But basically, it's a sort of listen and repeat sort of thing where you're listening to a native speaker and you're sort of repeating what they say like in real time. It's challenging at first, but it actually becomes a lot of fun when you get used to it. And it will really help, I think, with your pronunciation and your intonation. All right, I am going to leave it at that. But if you want to find more of my stuff, you can contact me at TOEFLresources.com. That's my website. I'll put a link to that in the video description, along with a few more fun links if anything comes to mind. Visit the website if you get a chance. It has guides to every section of the test. And if you want to sign up for lessons with me to really master the speaking section of the test, you could do that at the website as well. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. But if you come back in a few weeks, I should have a brand new guide to TOEFL Speaking Question 4. Take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you then.